Picture this. A man stands alone in the charred remains of what was once a home. His weathered hands, calloused from years of military service, tremble slightly as he sifts through the blackened debris. James Connor, 45 years old with salt and pepper hair and eyes that have seen too much, kneels to examine a partially burned wooden box that somehow survived the inferno. A fancy car pulls up on the street, and a well-dressed man steps out, surveying the destruction with calculating eyes. "Mr. Connor," the man calls out, his voice smooth as polished marble. "I understand this is a difficult time, but I represent Westfield Development. We've had our eye on this property for quite some time, and this unfortunate incident might be the perfect opportunity for you to sell and move on." James stands slowly, his jaw tightening. "My wife and I built this house when I came back from my second tour. Everything I had was in here." The developer smiles, revealing perfect white teeth. "Exactly why a fresh start might be best. We're prepared to make a generous offer, considering the circumstances." James clutches the wooden box tighter. "This land has been in my family for 3 generations. It's not for sale." The developer's smile doesn't waver, but his eyes harden. "Everyone has a price, Mr. Connor. Everyone. And after a tragedy like this, you'll find yours." He hands James a business card before walking away, pausing only to add, "I'll be in touch. Soon." James watches him go, the wooden box heavy in his hands. The contents inside shift slightly, making a soft sound that draws his attention downward. Something catches his eye. The edge of an envelope he's never seen before, partially visible, through a crack in the damaged box. Little did he know that what was inside would change everything. Let me take you back to where it all began. 3 days earlier, James Connor was a man who commanded respect in the small town of Mapleton. After 15 years in the army, including 3 tours in Afghanistan, he had returned home with honors and quiet dignity. He never spoke much about his service, but the residents knew enough to appreciate the sacrifice. James had taken over his father's contracting business, transforming it into the most trusted name in the county. His attention to detail was legendary, a holdover from his military days, and he never cut corners, even when it would have been easier and more profitable. The Connor family home sat on 5 acres at the edge of town, backing up to a picturesque lake. James had built much of it himself after returning from service, working alongside his wife Marie, who had passed away from cancer 3 years prior. The property wasn't just a home, it was a monument to their love and his connection to the town where he'd grown up. On weekends, James would often invite fellow veterans over for cookouts. They'd sit on his handcrafted deck overlooking the water, sharing stories and finding comfort in each other's understanding. The local kids knew him as the man who built the town playground and who always hired high school students during summer breaks, teaching them the value of honest work and craftsmanship. "You're building more than houses," he would tell them. "You're building trust." The lakefront property had become increasingly valuable as Mapleton grew. The town had caught the attention of developers from the city who saw potential for luxury, condominiums, and resort-style amenities. James had received numerous offers over the years, each one higher than the last, but he always declined politely. What he didn't know was that someone had been watching these interactions with growing interest. Richard Kessler, the head of Westfield Development, had been studying James for months. From his sleek downtown office, Kessler would examine maps of Mapleton, always coming back to the Connor property, the final puzzle piece in his vision for Westfield Shores, a luxury development that promised to transform the sleepy town into a playground for the wealthy. "That stubborn vet is the only thing standing between us and breaking ground," Kessler told his associates one afternoon, staring at aerial photographs of James's property. "Everyone has a pressure point. We just need to find his." James first encountered Kessler on a Tuesday morning at the local diner. He was having his usual breakfast, black coffee and scrambled eggs, when a well-dressed stranger slid into the booth across from him. "Mr. Connor," the man said with practiced charm. "Richard Kessler, Westfield Development. I hope you don't mind the interruption." James looked up from his newspaper. "How can I help you?" "I believe we can help each other. I've been trying to reach you about your property." James took a slow sip of his coffee. "I get plenty of offers. Not interested in any of them." Kessler's smile remained fixed, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "This isn't just any offer. We're talking about transforming Mapleton, bringing in jobs, tax revenue, tourism. Progress, Mr. Connor. Inevitable progress." "Nothing's inevitable except death and taxes," James replied evenly, "and my property isn't for sale." Kessler's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "You know, most people would see this as an opportunity, a chance to cash in on skyrocketing land value, but you're different." He said the last word like it left a bad taste in his mouth. "I am," James agreed. returning to his newspaper. Kessler stood, straightening his Italian suit. I respect your position, for now. But I should mention that we've already secured most of the lakefront properties. You're becoming an island, Mr. Connor, an increasingly isolated one. As Kessler walked away, James noticed several patrons watching with interest. The developer had made sure to speak just loudly enough for others to hear. The message was clear. James Connor was standing in the way of progress. That conversation was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, James experienced a series of escalating intrusions. First came the surveyors, who somehow mistakenly wandered onto his property, taking measurements and soil samples. When confronted, they apologized profusely, blaming outdated property line records. Next, James received notices from the county about supposed code violations on his property. Suddenly, the home he had built with his own hands, the home that had passed every inspection with flying colors, was allegedly violating half a dozen regulations. This is harassment, James told Sheriff Mitchell, an old friend who had served with him years ago. The sheriff sighed, examining the notices. These look suspicious to me too, James, but they've got official letterhead and signatures. Someone's pulling strings at the county level. Kessler, James said flatly. Probably, but proving it's another matter. That man has friends in high places, including Judge Harmon. A week later, an anonymous complaint led to an environmental study of the lake behind James's property. The study conveniently found concerns about runoff that might be traced to his land. At the town council meeting that followed, James stood to address the allegations. I've lived on that land my entire life except for my time serving this country. My father and grandfather were stewards of that lake before me. Anyone who knows me knows I would never do anything to harm it. Many nodded in agreement, but he noticed several unfamiliar faces in the crowd, city folks in expensive clothes, watching, with calculated interest. Councilwoman Eleanor Banks, who had known James since he was a boy, spoke up. I think we're all aware of Mr. Connor's character. These claims deserve scrutiny, not just acceptance. I move that we conduct an independent assessment. Her motion passed, but as James was leaving the meeting, Kessler appeared at his side. Public opinion is a fickle thing, the developer said. Quietly, today they support you, but when they realize you're standing between them and economic opportunity, well, the pressure intensified when local news ran a story about Westfield's development plans, featuring glossy renderings of a transformed lakefront with cafes, boutiques, and manicured parks. The article mentioned one holdout property owner without naming James directly, but everyone knew who they meant. The comments section filled with residents debating whether one man's nostalgia should outweigh the town's potential prosperity. James began to feel the community's perception shifting. At the grocery store, some neighbors avoided eye contact. At church, conversations sometimes hushed when he approached. Even some of his regular contracting clients became suddenly uncertain about planned projects. The final straw came when James discovered survey stakes marking a new road, running directly through his property. When he pulled them out, a county worker appeared with a sheriff's deputy James didn't recognize. Sir, you're interfering with county road planning, the worker said. This is private property, James responded firmly. The deputy stepped forward. There's been some question about that, actually. We have documents suggesting this particular easement may belong to the county. James knew it was nonsense, but he also recognized the threat. This was no longer just pressure. It was a coordinated campaign. That night, James sat at his kitchen table surrounded by property deeds, surveys, and his grandfather's old journals. If they wanted to fight, he would be prepared. He set up security cameras around his property and began recording every interaction. He contacted his old army buddy who had become a lawyer in the city, sending him copies of everything. They're trying to wear you down, his friend told him. Make you feel isolated, like you have no choice but to sell. Classic pressure tactics. James began methodically documenting every incident. He recorded phone calls, saved emails, photographed the survey stakes, and kept a detailed journal. He researched Westfield development and discovered a pattern. They had used similar tactics in other small towns, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. He created a private online group for lakefront property owners who had already sold to Westfield, discovering that many felt they had been manipulated or pressured. Several mentioned strange incidents, unexpected tax audits, zoning problems, even personal scandals that had preceded their decisions to sell. They found my pressure. Point, one former owner wrote. I just couldn't fight anymore. When James shared his findings with Sheriff Mitchell, his friend was troubled, but cautious. You've got patterns here, James, but not enough proof for legal action. Kessler's too smart for that. He keeps his hands clean. The confrontation, James, had been expecting finally came at a community barbecue. Kessler approached him publicly, loud enough for nearby residents to hear. "Mr. Connor, I understand your attachment to your property, but surely you can see you're hurting the community. These good people deserve the opportunities our development would bring." James remained calm. These good people deserve to have their town developed responsibly, not carved up by outside interests who'll be gone once they've made their profit. "That's a rather selfish perspective," Kessler responded. "Perhaps your time away from civilian life has made it difficult to understand progress." Something in James snapped at the thinly veiled reference to his military service. "Let me be clear, Mr. Kessler. I've faced much more intimidating opponents than you. Your tactics, the code violations, the environmental claims, the road easement nonsense, they're all documented. I know exactly what you're doing." Kessler's confident smile faltered for just a moment as several bystanders turned to listen more closely. "I've spoken with 7 other property owners who sold to you," James continued. "Interesting how they all experienced similar problems before deciding to sell, almost like a pattern." As James walked away, he could feel the atmosphere shifting. People were whispering, but this time, they were looking at Kessler, not him. For the first time, James felt he might have gained some ground. That night, he returned home late after meeting with his lawyer. The house was dark and quiet, too quiet. James immediately sensed something was wrong. The familiar creak of the porch step was missing, replaced by an ominous silence. Inside, he found his back door ajar, though nothing appeared to be missing. Cautiously exploring the house, James discovered his office had been searched. Carefully, but unmistakably, his computer was still there, but he suspected it had been tampered with. The filing cabinet containing his property documents stood slightly open, though all papers appeared to be in place. James's military training kicked in. Someone wanted him to know they had been there. A message, not a burglary. He checked his hidden security camera and saw a figure in professional attire entering through the back door using what looked like a lockpick set. The face wasn't clearly visible, but the build and clothing matched one of Kessler's associates. James called Sheriff Mitchell, who came immediately to investigate. "This crosses a line, James. Breaking and entering is a felony." "But we can't prove who it was," James said, studying the grainy footage. "No, but this gives us grounds to start an official investigation." The break-in left James unsettled. He spent the night on his couch, his old service pistol within reach, thinking about Marie and what she would say. She had always been his moral compass, his voice of reason. "Don't let them make you someone you're not," he could almost hear her saying. The next morning, James was at his workshop behind the house when he smelled it. Smoke. Running toward the main house, he saw flames already engulfing the east wing where his bedroom was located. He called 911 immediately, but by the time the volunteer fire department arrived, the fire had spread throughout most of the structure. James stood helplessly, watching as firefighters battled the blaze. Hours later, when they finally extinguished the flames, the chief approached him with a grim expression. "I'm sorry, James. We saved what we could, but the damage is extensive. Almost everything inside is gone." "How did it start?" James asked, his voice hollow. "Can't say for certain yet, but it looks like it might have been electrical, possibly in the wiring near your bedroom. We'll need to investigate." James knew his home's electrical system was impeccable. He had rewired it himself just 2 years earlier. The timing, right after the break-in, was too convenient to be coincidence. As he sifted through the ruins the next day, finding little salvageable from his life with Marie, James discovered his grandfather's wooden box, scorched but intact. It had been stored in a hope chest in the guest room, one of the less damaged areas. Opening it, he found family photographs, his military medals, and something unfamiliar. An envelope he had never seen before, yellowed with age. Inside was a letter dated 1952, addressed to his grandfather from the town council, along with a hand-drawn map and a legal document. As James read, his hands began to shake. The letter detailed a water rights agreement that his grandfather had negotiated with the town, ensuring that the natural spring on their property, the main source feeding the lake, would always remain under family control. According to the document, any development affecting the lake required approval from the Connor family as the water rights holders. The agreement had been formally recorded, but somehow misplaced in county records decades ago. The missing piece that explained why Kessler was so desperate to acquire his land wasn't just the lakefront location, it was the water rights that came with it. That's when Kessler had arrived at the burned ruins of his home, making his thinly veiled offer. After the developer left, James studied the documents more carefully. If legitimate, they changed everything. He needed to verify their authenticity and understand their full implications. Over the next 3 days, James immersed himself in research. He contacted historical archives, consulted water rights attorneys, and tracked down elderly town residents who might remember the agreement. Each confirmation strengthened his case. The documents were genuine, legally binding, and potentially devastating to Westfield's plans. James realized he needed more than just legal leverage. He needed to expose Kessler's tactics to the community. He reached out to a journalist from the regional newspaper who had written critically about similar developments in neighboring counties. Together, they began compiling evidence: the suspicious fire, the break-in, the pattern of harassment, and now the concealed water rights. James also discovered something Kessler had kept from potential buyers. The development plans included damming part of the natural spring to create an artificial lagoon, fundamentally altering the lake ecosystem. Environmental scientists confirmed this would likely damage the lake's delicate balance, potentially causing long-term harm to the wildlife and water quality. With his strategy in place, James prepared carefully for the upcoming town council meeting where Westfield was scheduled to present their final development proposal. He arranged for key witnesses to attend, including former property owners who had been pressured to sell and environmental experts prepared to discuss the potential impact on the lake. The night before the meeting, James received an unexpected visitor. Eleanor Banks, the councilwoman who had supported him. "I thought you should know," she said, sitting at the temporary trailer James was living in. "Kessler's been lobbying council members hard. He's promising kickbacks disguised as community improvement funds. Some are tempted." "And you?" James asked. She smiled sadly. "My family has fished that lake for 4 generations. Some things matter more than money." The town hall was packed beyond capacity for the meeting. James noticed Sheriff Mitchell had stationed deputies at all entrances, an unusual precaution that suggested he anticipated trouble. Kessler presented first, his presentation slick and persuasive, full of economic projections and artistic renderings. He emphasized job creation, tax revenue, and modernization, painting critics as backward-thinking obstructionists. "Change is inevitable," he concluded smoothly. "The only question is whether Mapleton will profit from it or be left behind." When it was James's turn to speak, he walked slowly to the podium, conscious of the community's attention. He was not a natural public speaker, but 15 years in the military had taught him the value of direct, honest communication. "I'm not here to tell you that development is wrong," he began. "Mapleton is growing, and we need to grow with it. But how we grow matters." He distributed copies of the water rights document to council members. "This legal agreement, signed in 1952 and still binding, gives my family oversight of any development affecting the spring on our property and the lake it feeds." This document was somehow lost from county records, but the original has survived. Murmurs spread through the audience as Kessler leaned forward, visibly tense. "But this isn't just about legal rights," James continued. "It's about how business is conducted in our town." He projected photographs onto the screen: his burned home, the break-in footage, the falsified code violations, the environmental report that had been manipulated. "3 separate fire investigators have confirmed that the fire at my home was not electrical. It was arson. Started with an accelerant near the bedroom window." He nodded toward Sheriff Mitchell, who stood. "We've opened a formal investigation," the sheriff confirmed. "And we have persons of interest." Kessler rose to object, but James wasn't finished. He played audio recordings of Westfield representatives pressuring elderly residents, followed by testimony from former property owners describing the tactics used against them. Finally, he revealed the environmental impact assessment conducted by independent scientists, showing the potential damage to the lake ecosystem from Westfield's hidden plans. "Mr. Kessler doesn't just want to build near our lake. His plans would fundamentally alter it, and not for the better." By the time James finished, the atmosphere in the room had transformed. Residents who had been uncertain were now openly hostile toward Kessler, who attempted damage control. "These are baseless accusations and outdated documents," Kessler insisted. "Westfield Development has always operated ethically." He was interrupted by the back door's opening. A woman in a suit entered, followed by 2 men carrying briefcases. James recognized her immediately: Catherine Myers, the state attorney general, whom he had contacted weeks earlier. "Mr. Kessler," she announced, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Representatives from my office would like to speak with you regarding an ongoing investigation into business practices at Westfield Development. We have some questions about patterns of harassment, falsified documents, and potential arson." The room erupted as Kessler was escorted out, his face ashen. The council immediately voted to suspend consideration of Westfield's proposal pending further investigation. Outside the town hall, residents gathered around James, many apologizing for having doubted him. Sheriff Mitchell approached with a grim satisfaction. Myers has been building a case against Kessler for months. Your evidence was the final piece they needed. They're executing search warrants at Westfield offices right now. In the weeks that followed, the full extent of Kessler's operation was revealed. The developer had used similar tactics in multiple communities, creating a web of shell companies to hide his methods. 3 of his associates were arrested in connection with the arson at James's home. County officials who had cooperated with the scheme resigned in disgrace. James could have rebuilt his house exactly as it was, but instead, he saw an opportunity for something more meaningful. Using the insurance money and a portion of the settlement from the civil suit against Westfield, he established the Mapleton Conservation Trust to protect the lake and surrounding land. He donated most of his property to the trust, with provisions for responsible, limited development that would benefit the community while preserving the natural environment. The trust would be governed by a board of local residents, ensuring decisions would always be made by those with a stake in the town's future. James built a smaller home further from the lake, allowing the original home site to become a community park named after Marie. The wooden box with the crucial letter was donated to the Town Historical Society, displayed as a reminder of how easily history can be forgotten or concealed. 1 year later, James stood on the observation deck of the newly opened Marie Connor Memorial Park, watching children play along the shoreline. The lake sparkled in the sunlight, cleaner than it had been in years thanks to restoration efforts funded by the trust. Eleanor Banks joined him, now serving as the trust's first director. Not exactly what you planned for your retirement, she observed. James smiled. No, but Marie would have approved. She always said everything happens for a reason. Even losing your home? He touched his pocket, where he kept a charred photograph of Marie that had survived the fire. That fire destroyed almost everything I owned, but it revealed something I needed to find. Sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what really matters. Around them, the community gathered for the park's official dedication. Many faces that had once looked at him with suspicion now showed respect and gratitude. The development that had eventually been approved was modest and environmentally conscious. Lakefront shops owned by local merchants, walking trails, and a small conference center that brought sustainable tourism to the area. Richard Kessler was serving time for fraud, arson conspiracy, and environmental violations. His company had been dissolved, its assets used to fund restoration projects in the communities he had damaged. You know, Eleanor said, what happened here has become something of a blueprint. 3 other towns have contacted me about establishing similar trusts. James nodded. That's how real progress happens, not by erasing the past, but by building on its foundation. As the sun began to set over the lake his grandfather had fought to protect, James thought about the chain of events that had led to this moment. The mysterious letter, hidden for decades, hadn't just saved his property, it had transformed his understanding of legacy. Some inheritances weren't measured in acres or dollars, but in responsibility and connection. Thank you all for being here today, James said, as he addressed the gathered community. This park belongs to all of us, just as the future of Mapleton belongs to all of us. What we experienced last year taught me something important. When we stand together, we can't be divided or conquered. He looked out at the faces of his neighbors, seeing strength and unity where there had once been division. I'd love to hear your stories about what this lake means to you, what memories you've made here, and what you hope for its future. Because those stories are what make this place worth fighting for. And if you faced similar situations in your own communities, share those too. The more we connect and learn from each other, the better equipped we are to protect what matters. Together, we're stronger than any developer's checkbook. As the crowd dispersed to enjoy the evening festivities, James remained on the deck, watching the water turn golden in the fading light. He had lost almost everything in that fire, but what he had found, purpose, community, and a new understanding of home, was worth far more than what the flames had taken.